The lukewarm dregs of my tea tasted like iron, but I held the cup tightly to stop my fingers from shaking. The cafe in Kensington hummed with the sound of clinking porcelain and hushed conversations. The kind of place where young professionals came to take meetings that mattered. I wasn't one of them anymore. I sat in the corner booth, my laptop open to a half-finished grant proposal that was due in 6 hours. Freelance work for a nonprofit that paid just enough to keep the lights on in my studio apartment. My lower back ached no matter how I positioned myself in the worn leather seat. 5 months of weight pressing against my spine in ways I hadn't anticipated. The modest burgundy blouse I wore, one of only 3 that still fit, had cost me £8 at a charity shop, and I'd stopped trying to disguise the swell of my abdomen. There was no point anymore. The proposal blurred on my screen. Budget projections in 3 different formats, program outcomes I barely understood. All due before midnight if I wanted the second half of my payment. My phone sat face down beside my tea, for voicemails from my landlord that I couldn't bring myself to listen to because I already knew what they'd say. The rent was late again, and sympathy only stretched so far. Louisa. The voice sliced through the ambient noise like broken glass. I would have recognized it in a crowd of thousands in my sleep in my worst nightmares. I looked up slowly, my stomach dropping. Stephen Lewis stood less than 3 feet away. His blonde hair slicked back with the kind of product that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. His black suit was tailored to perfection, showing off the lean frame he'd always been so proud of. Those pale blue eyes scanned me from head to toe, and I watched his expression shift from recognition to surprise to something that looked almost like satisfaction. The woman beside him was sleek and polished in a way I'd never managed even before. Dark hair and a professional chignon designer handbag tucked under one arm, nude heels that probably cost more than my laptop. She looked at me the way people look at car accidents, curious, pitying, relieved it wasn't them. Christ, I almost didn't recognize you. Stephen's mouth curved into something that might have passed for a smile in dim lighting. You look so different. My throat tightened. I hadn't seen him in 9 months, not since I'd walked out of our shared flat with 2 suitcases and a determination to never look back. I'd rearranged my entire life to avoid exactly this moment. Stephen. I forced my voice to stay level. I didn't know you came here. I don't usually. Client meeting ran long. His gaze dropped deliberately to my midsection, lingered there. But you clearly do. When did this happen? The weight gain, I mean. Because Louisa, you've really let yourself go. Heat crawled up my neck. The cafe seemed to contract around us, conversations at nearby tables fading to white noise. I was suddenly painfully aware of every person who might be listening, might be watching Stephen Lewis tell his fat ex-girlfriend that she'd stopped caring about herself. I should get back to work. I reached for my laptop bag, but Stephen moved closer, his body blocking the narrow gap between my booth and the neighboring table. Come on, don't be like that. I'm just concerned. He glanced at his companion, then back at me, his voice taking on that false gentleness I'd learned to fear. You used to be so careful about what you ate. Remember? And now? I mean, stress eating is one thing, but this is extreme. You should really see someone. For your health. The woman beside him made a soft sound that might have been sympathy but landed like mockery. Stephen. Maybe she's just going through something. Yeah, a quarter-pounder with cheese. Stephen laughed at his own joke. Seriously, Lou, what's your excuse? Because you look like you've been living on takeaway for 6 months straight. I tried to stand, but my body felt heavy, slow. The pregnancy made everything harder. Getting up, moving quickly, defending myself. Stephen knew it. I could see the knowledge in his eyes, the way he'd positioned himself deliberately to keep me pinned. Excuse me, I managed. I need to leave. Leave for what? Another shift at some dead-end freelance gig. He leaned against the table edge, casual, like we were old friends catching up. I heard you're doing charity work now. That must pay brilliantly, judging by. His gesture encompassed everything. My second-hand clothes, my battered laptop, my corner booth existence. The baby I carried alone because the father had disappeared the moment I'd told him. Blocked my number so fast I'd wondered if he'd ever existed at all. Move, Steven. I'm just trying to help. His tone shifted, became almost tender, which was infinitely worse. This isn't healthy. You're clearly going through something and you don't look well. Maybe you should talk to someone. A professional. Because this. He gestured at my body again. This isn't you. My vision narrowed. I was going to be sick, right here among the exposed brick and Edison bulbs. I pressed one hand protectively to my stomach, feeling the baby shift beneath my palm, and wished desperately for the ability to simply vanish. The lady asked you to move. The voice came from directly behind Steven, low and controlled, with an accent that turned the words into something more than a suggestion. Mediterranean, maybe. Italian. Steven stiffened. Turned. The man standing there was taller than Steven, broader through the shoulders, with dark brown hair swept back from a face that seemed carved from stone. He wore a black suit that fit him like armor, and there was something in the way he held himself, utterly still, completely at ease, that made Steven take an involuntary step backward. Sorry, mate, we're just talking. Steven's voice had changed, lost its sharp edge. This is my ex. We're catching up. No. The man's gaze shifted to me for a fraction of a second, dark eyes that seemed to see everything, then returned to Steven. You're leaving. It wasn't a question. Wasn't even a threat. Just a statement of absolute fact, delivered in a tone that made the temperature in the cafe drop several degrees. Look, I don't know who you think you are, but this is a private conversation. The man didn't respond, didn't move, but something changed in the air between them, and suddenly there was another man standing near the door, dark suit, watchful eyes, the kind of presence that suggested he'd be delighted if Steven gave him an excuse to intervene. Steven's companion tugged his arm. Steven, we should go. Right. Yeah. Steven forced a laugh that sounded hollow. Anyway, Louisa, good seeing you. You should really watch what you're eating, though. You don't want to end up diabetic on top of everything else. He walked away quickly, his companion's heels clicking against the tile as they disappeared toward the back of the cafe. The stranger watched them leave, his expression unreadable, then turned to me. Are you all right? I managed a nod, though my hands were trembling so badly I had to hide them under the table. Thank you. You didn't need to do that. Yes, I did. He gestured to the empty seat across from me, his movements precise and economical. May I? Every instinct told me to refuse, to gather my things and leave, to not accept help from a man who moved through the world like he owned pieces of it. But my legs felt weak, and I wasn't certain I could stand without humiliating myself further. All right. He sat, and up close I could see the details, the faint shadow of stubble along his jaw, the thin gold chain just visible at his open collar, the way his dark eyes assessed me without making me feel judged. He was older than Steven, late 30s perhaps, and carried himself with the kind of certainty that came from never having to prove anything to anyone. I'm Tom. He didn't offer his hand, seemed to understand instinctively that I wasn't ready for contact. Louisa. Louisa. He repeated it like he was committing it to memory. That man. Your ex. Yes. He's a bastard. A startled laugh escaped me before I could stop it. Yes. He is. Tom raised one hand, and a server appeared at his elbow within seconds. Water for the lady. And whatever she was drinking, but hot. I'm fine, really. You're shaking. His tone left no room for argument. The server returned almost immediately with sparkling water, and a fresh cup of tea that probably cost more than my entire lunch budget. I wrapped my hands around the porcelain, letting the heat seep into my palms. Thank you, I said quietly, for the tea and for before. I have a younger sister. Tom's expression softened almost imperceptibly. I know what it looks like when a man tries to make a woman feel small. We sat without speaking for a moment. Around us, the cafe continued its afternoon rhythm, oblivious to the small war that had just been fought and won. Stephen and his companion were visible through the front window, walking quickly toward a black Mercedes. "Is he the father?" Tom asked, his voice quiet enough that no one else could hear. "No." The answer came quickly, instinctively. "The father wanted nothing to do with it. With me. He signed away his rights the day I told him. Then he's a fool." The simple certainty in those 3 words made my chest tighten. I took a sip of tea, let the warmth ground me. "I should let you get back to your meeting." I nodded toward the man still standing near the entrance. "I don't have a meeting." "Where do you live?" The question should have felt intrusive. Instead, it felt inevitable, like he was simply filling in details for a decision already made. "Whitechapel. It's not far. Let me drive you home." "That's not necessary." "Perhaps not." Tom stood, pulling a card from his jacket pocket and placing it on the table between us. Heavy cream stock, embossed with just a name and number. "But I'm offering. My car is outside." "I have my car. In the car park. Then someone will drive it to your flat." He said it like it was already decided, like my objections were anticipated and gently overruled. "You shouldn't drive when you're this upset." He was right, though I hated admitting it. My hands still trembled, and the thought of navigating London traffic while trying not to cry felt impossible. I looked at the card again. Tom Cruise. 10 digits that felt like a door I hadn't known was there, opening onto something I couldn't yet name. Tom's car was exactly what I expected. A black Mercedes with tinted windows and leather seats that probably cost more than I'd earn in 6 months. The man who'd been standing by the door, Tom called him Marcus, drove my battered Honda behind us, and I tried not to think about what he must be thinking as he navigated its temperamental clutch. I sat in the back beside Tom, my laptop bag clutched on my lap like a shield. The city slid past the windows, familiar streets suddenly feeling foreign from inside this cocoon of wealth and quiet power. "How long have you lived in Whitechapel?" Tom asked. His voice was conversational, but I had the sense he already knew the answer. 9 months. Since the breakup. I kept my eyes on the passing buildings. "It's all I could afford on my own." "And the father of your child?" "Gone." The word came out flat. I told him at 3 months. He transferred money for a termination and blocked my number. I haven't heard from him since. Tom was quiet for a long moment. When I finally looked at him, his expression was unreadable, but something in his eyes had gone very cold. "His loss," he said simply. We pulled up outside my building, a converted warehouse with water stains on the exterior brick, and a front door that never quite locked properly. Marcus parked my Honda in the street, then disappeared into a second car that had apparently been following us the entire time. I hadn't even noticed. "Thank you for the ride," I said, reaching for the door handle. "And for everything." "I should." "Louisa." Tom's hand didn't touch me, but the way he said my name stopped me completely. "That man today. He won't be the last person to try to make you feel worthless. And you're vulnerable right now, whether you want to admit it or not." Heat flooded my face. "I can take care of myself." "I'm sure you can." His tone held no judgment. "But you shouldn't have to. Not alone. Not like this." "What are you suggesting?" Tom reached into his jacket and pulled out a different card. This one with an address embossed in gold. "I own a property in Belgravia. 12 bedrooms, most of them empty. There's a housekeeper, security, a doctor on call. You could stay there. Finish your pregnancy somewhere safe. No rent, no landlord calls, no men like Stephen Lewis making you feel small in public places." I stared at him. "I don't even know you." "No," he agreed. "But I know men like your ex. And I know what it looks like when someone is drowning and too proud to ask for help." He placed the card on the seat between us. "Think about it. You have my number. Call me when you're ready." "And what would you want in return?" Something flickered in his dark eyes. "For you to be safe. That's all." He got out of the car, opened my door, and waited while I gathered my things. Marcus had already placed my laptop bag on the pavement. As I walked toward my building, I felt Tom's gaze on my back, steady and watchful. The card was still in my hand when I reached my door. I turned back once, but the Mercedes was already gone, disappeared into the London evening like it had never been there at all. Inside my studio apartment with its peeling wallpaper and distant sound of my neighbors arguing, I set the card on my scratched kitchen counter and stared at it for a long time. Tom Cruise. An address in Belgravia. And an offer that felt simultaneously like salvation and something far more dangerous. I lasted 3 more days in Whitechapel before the ceiling started leaking. It wasn't dramatic, just a steady drip in the corner of my studio that the landlord refused to fix without 2 weeks' notice and a £50 deposit I didn't have. I spent an evening watching brown water collect in a pasta pot while my neighbor's music throbbed through the wall, and I thought about the card on my counter. Tom answered on the first ring. "I'll send Marcus," was all he said. The estate in Belgravia was obscene. That was the only word for it. White stone facade, black iron gates that opened silently as Marcus drove through, and a circular drive with a fountain I could have bathed in. The front door alone probably cost more than everything I owned. A woman in her 50s met us on the steps. She introduced herself as Mrs. Chun, the housekeeper, and if she had any thoughts about the pregnant woman with 2 suitcases and a dying laptop, her face didn't show them. "Mr. Cruise said to put you in the East Wing," she said, her accent crisp and efficient. "The morning light is better there, and it's quieter. Away from the main household traffic." I followed her through rooms that felt like museum exhibits. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, artwork that was probably worth more than my annual income. Everything was pristine, untouched, like no one actually lived here. My room was larger than my entire Whitechapel studio. 4-poster bed with silk sheets, an ensuite bathroom with heated floors, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a private garden. There was even a desk, antique mahogany, positioned perfectly to catch the light. "Mr. Cruise thought you might need somewhere to work," Mrs. Chun said, gesturing to the desk. "There's high-speed internet, and the printer is in the study down the hall. Dinner is at 7, but if you prefer to eat in your room, just let me know." She left me alone, and I stood in the center of all that luxury feeling like an imposter. I unpacked my 2 suitcases, and my clothes looked ridiculous in the enormous wardrobe, like children's things hung in an adult's closet. I didn't see Tom that first day. Or the second. Mrs. Chun brought meals on a silver tray, actual silver, and I ate alone at the mahogany desk, working on freelance projects that felt increasingly absurd in this setting. Budget proposals for charities while sitting in a room that could house a family of 4. Grant applications while surrounded by art I couldn't name. On the 3rd day, I ventured out of my room properly. The house was a labyrinth of corridors and closed doors. I found the study Mrs. Chun had mentioned, then a library with shelves that reached the ceiling, then a conservatory filled with plants I didn't recognize. I also found the men. They were everywhere, always in dark suits, always watching. They didn't speak to me, didn't approach, but I felt their presence like a weight. One stationed near the front entrance. 2 in the garden. Another I glimpsed through a window, patrolling the perimeter. This wasn't just wealth. This was something else entirely. I found Tom in his office on the 4th evening. The door was open, and he sat behind a desk that looked like it belonged to a head of state, talking in rapid Italian on the phone. He saw me, held up one finger, then ended the call mid-sentence. "Louisa, come in." I stepped inside, acutely aware of my second-hand maternity jeans, and the fact that I hadn't seen him since the car. "I wanted to thank you for all of this. It's incredibly generous. It's practical." He gestured to the chair across from him. "You're comfortable?" "I'm overwhelmed." The honesty escaped before I could stop it. "Tom, this house, your men. The way Mrs. Chun acts like it's completely normal to have a pregnant stranger living here. What exactly do you do?" He leaned back in his chair, studying me with those dark, unreadable eyes. "I solve problems for people who can't solve them themselves." "That's not an answer." It's the only answer you need right now. I should have left. Should have gathered my pathetic 2 suitcases and called a taxi and gone back to my leaking studio. But the baby kicked against my ribs, a sharp reminder of why I was here, and I stayed in the chair. The men with guns, I said quietly. They're not just security, are they? No. And you're not just a businessman. No. The word hung between us, heavy with implication. Tom didn't look away, didn't try to soften it or explain it away. He just watched me, waiting to see what I'd do with the truth he wasn't quite speaking. Should I be afraid of you? I asked. Something shifted in his expression, so subtle I almost missed it. I hope not. But that's your decision to make. I stood, my legs unsteady. I should go. Let you get back to work. Louisa. His voice stopped me at the door. You're safe here. Whatever else you choose to believe about me, believe that. I went back to my gilded room in the East Wing and lay on silk sheets, staring at the ornate ceiling. Outside, I could hear the quiet footsteps of Tom's men making their rounds, an army protecting a fortress I'd somehow stumbled into. The baby moved inside me, restless and unknowing. I placed my hand on my stomach and wondered what kind of cage I'd traded my freedom for, and whether the man downstairs was my savior or something far more dangerous. I'd been at the estate for 2 weeks when the first message arrived. It came through Instagram, a platform I barely used anymore. The notification appeared while I was working at the mahogany desk, autumn sunlight streaming through the windows, and I almost deleted it without reading. Saw you getting into a very expensive car the other day. New boyfriend already? That was fast. Or is he the reason you left me? Steven. My hands went cold. I stared at the message, then at the username. It was him, verified and everything, probably still using the same profile he'd had when we were together. The one where he posted gym photos and motivational quotes about success. I blocked him immediately and tried to go back to work, but my concentration was shattered. How had he seen me? Where? I'd barely left the estate except for one doctor's appointment, and Marcus had driven me directly there and back. The second message came an hour later, this time to my email. You can block me on social media, Lou, but you can't hide. I know where you're living. Or should I say who you're living with? Tom Cruise. Interesting choice. Does he know about the baby? Does he know it's not his? My stomach turned. I read the message 3 times, each word feeling like a small violation. Then I did what I should have done with the first one. I took a screenshot and went to find Tom. He was in the library reading something on a tablet, a cup of espresso on the table beside him. He looked up when I entered, and whatever he saw in my face made him set the tablet down immediately. What happened? I handed him my phone without speaking, watched his eyes move across the screen, his expression darkening with each line. When did this start? His voice was very calm, which somehow made it worse. An hour ago. The first one came through Instagram. I wrapped my arms around myself. Tom, how does he know where I am? I haven't told anyone. I've barely left the house. He's been following you. Or he's hired someone to. Tom stood, already pulling out his own phone. Marcus, my office. Now. 10 minutes later, we were all in Tom's office, me, Tom, Marcus, and another man I'd seen around the estate but never spoken to. Tom had the messages pulled up on his computer, the words looking even more sinister on the large screen. Find out how he got the information, Tom said to Marcus. Check all the security footage from the past 2 weeks. Streets, traffic cameras, everything. I want to know if he followed her himself or if he hired someone. And if he hired someone? Marcus asked. Then I want to know who, and I want to have a conversation with them about professional ethics. The way Tom said conversation made my skin prickle. There's more, I said quietly. All 3 men turned to look at me. Steven doesn't do anything without a reason. If he's reaching out now after weeks of silence, it's because he wants something. As if summoned by my words, my phone buzzed. Another email. I've been doing some research on your new benefactor. Very interesting business connections. I'm sure the tabloids would love a story about Tom Cruise's pregnant mistress, especially when they find out the baby isn't his. I wonder what that information is worth. Tom read it over my shoulder. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. He's going to try to sell the story, I said, my voice shaking. He's going to tell people that we're together, that I'm some kind of gold digger who trapped you. Let him try. Tom's voice was ice. You don't understand. Stephen has connections in media. His firm does PR for half the luxury brands in London. He can make this sound however he wants, and people will believe him because I'm nobody and you're. I gestured helplessly at the office, the estate, the life I still didn't fully understand. I'm what? Powerful. Dangerous. The kind of man people write exposés about. I met his eyes. If Stephen sells this story, it won't just hurt me. It'll hurt you too. Your reputation, your business, whatever it is you actually do. Tom was quiet for a long moment, then turned to the other man in the room. Vincent, I need you to make some calls. Find out who Stephen Lewis has been talking to. Journalists, photographers, anyone in media who might be interested in this kind of story. I want to know before anything gets published. Vincent nodded and left. Marcus followed, leaving Tom and me alone. I'm sorry, I said. I should have told you about Stephen before. About how he is. I didn't think he'd find me. This isn't your fault. Tom moved closer, not touching me but close enough that I could see the controlled fury in his eyes. Men like Stephen Lewis, they can't stand seeing women escape them. It threatens their sense of power. What are you going to do? Make him understand that threatening you was a mistake. The certainty in his voice should have frightened me. Instead, I felt something else entirely. A dark, terrible relief that someone was finally on my side. My phone buzzed again. Another message. TikTok Lou. I'll give you 24 hours to respond before I start making calls. Unless you'd like to meet and discuss this like adults? I'm sure we can come to some arrangement. I showed it to Tom. His jaw tightened. Don't respond, he said. Don't engage with him at all. I'll handle this. How? He looked at me, and in that moment I saw past the careful control to something far more dangerous underneath. Leave that to me. Stephen's 24-hour deadline came and went in silence. I spent it waiting for something to happen. A tabloid article, a photographer at the gates, Stephen himself appearing with cameras in tow. But there was nothing. Just the usual quiet rhythm of the estate, Mrs. Chun bringing meals, the security team making their rounds. Tom disappeared the day after I showed him the messages. Marcus said he had business in the city, offered no other details, and I didn't ask. I'd learned that questions about Tom's absences were met with polite stonewalling. He returned on the third day, just after sunset. I was in the conservatory, the one room in the estate that felt almost normal, surrounded by green growing things that didn't care about wealth or danger. I'd taken to sitting there in the evenings, my laptop balanced on my knees, pretending I could still concentrate on work. Louisa. I looked up to find Tom in the doorway, still in his black suit but with his tie loosened, looking more tired than I'd ever seen him. You're back, I said, closing my laptop. Is everything? Stephen Lewis won't be bothering you again. The way he said it made my breath catch. What did you do? I had a conversation with him. Explained that his behavior was unacceptable. Tom moved into the conservatory, the fading light casting shadows across his face. He's withdrawn his threats. You won't be hearing from him. Just like that. Just like that. I wanted to ask more, wanted to know what kind of conversation could make someone like Stephen back down so completely. But something in Tom's expression told me I didn't actually want those details. Thank you, I said instead. Tom nodded, then sat in the chair across from me, which he'd never done before. He'd always kept a careful distance, professional almost, like I was a guest he was obligated to tolerate rather than someone living in his house. We need to talk, he said. About why you're really here. My hands moved instinctively to my stomach. I thought we already covered that. Stephen was harassing me, I needed somewhere safe. I'm not talking about Steven. Tom leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his dark eyes fixed on mine. I'm talking about the baby. The air seemed to leave the room. I'd been so careful not to mention it, not to make my pregnancy his problem. Mrs. Chan knew, obviously, but we'd maintained this careful fiction that I was just a woman who needed temporary shelter. Nothing more complicated than that. I don't understand, I managed. I've known since the cafe, Louisa. Since the moment I saw you. His voice was gentle but firm. The way you held yourself, the way you touched your stomach when Steven was talking. I have 3 sisters, 2 of them with children. I know what 5 months pregnant looks like. Heat flooded my face. Then why didn't you say anything? Because you weren't ready to talk about it. And I wasn't going to force you. He paused. But after what happened with Steven, after his threats, we can't pretend anymore. This child makes you vulnerable in ways you don't fully understand yet. I'm handling it. Are you? Tom's tone wasn't cruel, just honest. The father abandoned you. Your ex is trying to use your pregnancy as leverage. You're living in my house because you have nowhere else to go, working freelance jobs that barely pay rent on a studio you can't return to. That's not handling it, Louisa. That's surviving by your fingernails. The truth of it hit harder than I expected. I looked away, blinking against the sudden burn of tears I refused to let fall. What do you want me to say? My voice came out rough. That I'm terrified? That I lie awake every night wondering how I'm going to do this alone? That every time the baby moves I feel equal parts joy and absolute panic? I want you to stop pretending you have to do it alone. I looked back at him, confused. Tom, you've already done more than. I'm saying that child is under my protection now. He cut me off, his voice taking on that edge of absolute authority I'd heard when he dealt with Steven. Anyone who threatens you threatens that baby. And anyone who threatens what's mine answers to me. The possessiveness in his tone should have frightened me. Instead, it settled something deep in my chest that had been untethered since the moment I'd seen the positive pregnancy test. I'm not yours, I said, but the words lacked conviction. Aren't you? Tom stood, moved closer. Not touching, never touching without permission, but close enough that I could see the absolute certainty in his eyes. You're living in my house. Under my protection. Carrying a child that I've decided belongs to my family now, whether you realize it or not. You can't just decide that. I already have. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a folder I hadn't noticed him carrying. I've had my lawyers draw up papers. They establish you as part of my household, give you legal protections under my name. If anyone tries to use your pregnancy against you, they'll have to go through me first. Through my lawyers, my resources, my reputation. I stared at the folder like it might bite me. Why would you do this? Because that child deserves better than what you've been given. And because... He paused, something shifting in his expression. Because I've watched you for 3 weeks now. The way you work even when you're exhausted. The way you're kind to Mrs. Chun even though you're terrified of being here. The way you protect that baby even though you're barely protecting yourself. Tom, you're stronger than you know, Louisa. But strength doesn't mean you have to be alone. He placed the folder on the table between us. Read the papers. Think about it. But know this, whether you sign them or not, my position hasn't changed. That child is under my protection now. So are you. He left before I could respond, his footsteps echoing through the conservatory and fading into the depths of the house. I sat in the gathering darkness, one hand on my swelling stomach, the folder sitting before me like a door I hadn't known existed. Outside, I could hear Tom's men beginning their evening rounds, an army of protection I'd stumbled into without meaning to. The baby kicked, strong and insistent, and I wondered if Tom was right. If strength meant accepting help instead of drowning alone. If protection could be offered without strings attached, or if I was walking into something far more binding than I understood. I opened the folder and began to read. I signed the papers 3 days later. Tom didn't smile when I handed them back. just nodded once and filed them away in his office safe, like they were the most natural thing in the world. Like women didn't just sign themselves into protection agreements with men they barely knew, men whose business they still didn't fully understand. "Good," was all he said. "Now we can begin." I didn't ask what he meant. I was learning that Tom revealed things in his own time on his own terms. The first lesson came that evening at dinner. Tom had insisted I start eating with him rather than hiding in my room, and Mrs. Chun had set the table in the smaller dining room, the one that only sat 12 instead of 30. "You need to understand how people perceive you," Tom said, cutting into his steak with surgical precision. "Right now, you move through the world trying to be invisible, trying not to take up space." "That's not true," I said, though we both knew it was. "You apologize when Mrs. Chun brings you food. You make yourself smaller in hallways when my men walk past. You act like you're a burden rather than a guest." He met my eyes. "That stops now. I don't know how to be anything else." "Then I'll teach you." He set down his knife and fork. Lesson 1. People treat you the way you allow them to. Stephen treated you like you were worthless because you believed you were. The father of your child disappeared because you made it easy for him. The words stung, but I couldn't argue with them. What am I supposed to do differently? Take up space. Demand respect. Stop asking permission for things you're entitled to. Tom leaned back in his chair. "Tomorrow night, I'm hosting a dinner. Business associates. You'll attend." My stomach dropped. "Tom, I can't." "You can. And you will." His tone left no room for negotiation. "You're part of this household now. That means you need to understand how it functions." The dinner was everything I'd feared and worse. 12 men in expensive suits, their wives or girlfriends glittering with jewelry that could have funded small countries. They arrived in luxury cars, handed their coats to staff I'd never seen before, and moved through Tom's home like they owned pieces of it. I'd spent 2 hours getting ready with Mrs. Chen's help, wearing a dress she'd somehow procured that actually fit my pregnant body, black silk that made me look almost elegant instead of just swollen. But standing in the drawing room with a glass of sparkling water, I felt like an imposter at a costume party. Tom appeared at my elbow. "Stop fidgeting. I don't belong here. You belong exactly where I say you belong." He guided me toward a cluster of guests. "Marco Vescovi, meet Louisa John. She's staying with me for the foreseeable future." Marco was in his 60s, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, with the kind of face that had seen things most people only read about in newspapers. He looked me up and down with undisguised assessment. "Staying with you," he repeated, his accent thick. "In what capacity?" The question was deliberately rude, designed to make me stammer or blush. I felt Tom tense beside me, ready to intervene. But something in Marco's eyes, the expectation that I'd crumble, that I'd prove I was just another pretty thing Tom had taken in, sparked something hot and defiant in my chest. "In the capacity of someone whose business Tom values," I said, keeping my voice level. "Though I'm curious why you think that's any of your concern." Tom's hand brushed the small of my back, so briefly I might have imagined it. Marco's eyebrows rose. Then he laughed, genuine and surprised. "She has teeth. Good. Too many people in this life are spineless." He switched to Italian, speaking to Tom too quickly for me to follow. Tom responded in the same language, and I caught my name, the word famiglia, and Marco's approving nod. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of similar encounters. Tom would introduce me, someone would probe for weakness, and I found myself responding with the sharpness I didn't know I possessed. The pregnancy gave me strange confidence. What were these people going to do, intimidate a woman carrying a child? By the time the last guest left, near midnight, I was exhausted but exhilarated. Tom found me in the library afterward, shoes off, feet propped on an ottoman. "You did well tonight," he said. "I insulted at least 3 of your guests. You stood your ground with 3 of my guests. There's a difference." He poured himself a whiskey, gestured to ask if I wanted anything. I shook my head. Marco asked if you were available for consultation on a translation issue. He has documents, Russian to English, needs someone he can trust. I blinked. What kind of documents? The kind that require discretion. Tom swirled his glass. The kind that pay very well. Tom, I do grant proposals for charities. I don't. You do whatever work you're qualified to do. And you're qualified for this. He sat across from me. Lesson 2. Your skills have value beyond what you've been selling them for. Stop thinking small. Over the next 3 weeks, Tom's lessons continued. He taught me to read people, to notice who held real power in a room versus who simply postured. He taught me the difference between respect and fear, between strength and cruelty. He taught me that silence could be more powerful than words, that sometimes the person who speaks least controls the conversation. And I discovered something unsettling. I was good at it. The translation work Marco sent was challenging but not impossible. Legal documents, financial records, things that required precision and absolute discretion. I worked at the mahogany desk in my room, my growing belly pressed against the edge, and felt my brain engage in ways the charity work never had. More offers came. A woman named Sophia needed Italian contracts reviewed. Someone else wanted Russian correspondence verified. Word spread through Tom's network that he had someone reliable. Someone who understood that what she translated stayed translated and nothing more. The money was staggering. What I'd earned in a month of freelancing I now made in a week. You have a talent for this world, Tom said one evening, watching me work through a particularly complex document. For seeing the truth under the surface. For knowing what matters and what's just noise. It's just translation. It's never just anything. He moved closer, reading over my shoulder. You're cataloging power structures, money flows, relationships. Whether you realize it or not, you're learning how my world actually works. I looked up at him. And that doesn't worry you? That I might see too much? No. His dark eyes held mine. Because you're part of it now. And because I trust you not to betray that. The weight of his trust felt heavier than any document I'd translated. I turned back to the work, but I could feel Tom still watching, could feel the shift between us that had been building since the dinner party. I wasn't just a woman he was protecting anymore. I was becoming something else entirely. Something that belonged to his world in ways I was only beginning to understand. The estate was silent when I woke at 3 in the morning, the baby pressing insistently against my bladder. I'd grown accustomed to these midnight interruptions, the way pregnancy turned sleep into something fragmented and unsatisfying. After using the bathroom, I knew I wouldn't fall back asleep immediately. My mind was too active, still processing the documents I'd been translating earlier. A property acquisition in Prague that involved far more shell corporations than seemed strictly necessary. I pulled on the silk robe Mrs. Chun had left in my wardrobe, expensive enough that I still felt guilty wearing it, and padded downstairs toward the library. Reading sometimes helped when my brain refused to quiet. I wasn't expecting to find Tom there. He sat in one of the leather chairs near the fireplace, still dressed despite the hour, a glass of whiskey in his hand and a tablet discarded on the side table. The fire had burned down to embers, casting his face in shadow. "I'm sorry," I said, already backing toward the door. "I didn't mean to intrude." "You're not intruding. You live here." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Can't sleep. Your son has decided my bladder makes an excellent punching bag." The words were out before I realized what I'd said. Your son. Not the baby, not my child. Your son. Tom's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air between us. "Is it a boy?" he asked quietly. "I don't know. I haven't asked at the scans." I moved into the room, drawn by something I couldn't name. "But it feels like a boy. The way he moves. Strong. Demanding. Like his mother." I laughed despite myself. "I'm not strong. You're the strongest person I've met in a very long time." Tom took a sip of his whiskey. "You just don't see it yet." I sat in the chair across from him, tucking my feet under me. The fire popped softly, and outside I could hear rain starting against the windows. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "You can ask." I may not answer. "Why did you help me that day in the cafe? You didn't know me. Stephen was nothing to you. You could have walked past." Tom was quiet for a long moment, rolling the whiskey glass between his palms. "I told you. I have sisters. I know what it looks like when a man tries to diminish a woman." "That's not the whole truth though, is it?" His dark eyes met mine across the dim space. "No, it's not." The admission hung between us, heavy with unspoken meaning. I waited, my heart beating faster than it should. "I saw you before he approached," Tom said finally. "Sitting in that booth, working on your laptop, completely focused. You had this expression, determined despite everything. And then he walked over and I watched that determination crack. Watched you try to make yourself smaller." He set down his glass. "I've spent my entire adult life around people who take what they want, who use fear and power to control others. And in that moment, watching Stephen Lewis try to break you in a cafe full of strangers, I decided I was tired of watching men like him win. So it was principle. At first." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "And then you spoke to Marco Vescovi like you've been navigating my world your entire life. And then you stayed up until 2 in the morning translating contracts because you wanted to understand them completely, not just adequately. And then you started taking meals with me and asking questions about my business that no one else dares to ask." My breath caught. "Tom, I'm not finished." His voice was gentle but firm. "You walk through this house like you still don't believe you belong here. Like at any moment I'm going to realize my mistake and send you back to that studio in Whitechapel. But Louisa, you belong here more than half the people I do business with. You belong here because you've earned it. I haven't earned anything. You gave me everything. I gave you a room and protection. You've earned everything else." He stood, moved to the fireplace, his back to me. "The respect of my associates. The trust of my household. The right to sit in this library at 3 in the morning and call that child my son, without even realizing you've done it." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stood, my hand instinctively moving to my stomach. "I didn't mean." "I know what you meant." Tom turned to face me, and in the firelight I could see something in his expression I'd never seen before. Vulnerability. "What?" "The question is whether you understand what it means that I didn't correct you." The rain intensified outside, drumming against the windows. We stood there, the width of the library between us, and I felt the weight of everything unspoken finally demanding acknowledgement. "Tell me," I whispered. Tom crossed the distance between us in 3 strides. He didn't touch me, but he was close enough that I could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the shadow of stubble along his jaw, the way his chest rose and fell with controlled breathing. "I want you to stay," he said. "Not because you're afraid or because you have nowhere else to go. I want you to stay because this is where you belong. With me. In this house. In this life. Tom, I'm pregnant with another man's child. You're carrying my son." The possessiveness in his voice was absolute. "The moment I decided to protect you, that child became mine. Biology is irrelevant. What matters is who will raise him, who will teach him, who will stand between him and everything in this world that would try to hurt him." My eyes burned with tears I couldn't quite control. "You can't just decide that. I already have." He lifted one hand, hesitated, then cupped my face with a gentleness that seemed impossible from someone so dangerous. "The question is whether you've decided the same thing." I should have pulled away. Should have reminded him that I'd known him for less than 2 months, that this was insane, that you didn't just build a family out of circumstance and protection agreements. Instead, I leaned into his palm and let myself finally acknowledge what I'd been feeling since that first dinner party, maybe since the cafe. "I'm terrified," I admitted. "Of me. Of how much I want this to be real." Something in Tom's expression softened. "It's real, Louisa. Everything about this is real." He kissed me then, soft and careful, like I was something precious rather than just another obligation he'd taken on. I kissed him back, my hands finding the front of his shirt, 6 months of loneliness and fear finally breaking against the reality of his solid presence. When we finally pulled apart, both breathing harder than we should, Tom rested his forehead against mine. "Stay," he said again. "Not as a guest. Not as someone I'm protecting. Stay as mine." I thought about the studio in Whitechapel, about Stephen's cruelty, about the father who'd signed away his rights before the child even had a heartbeat. I thought about the past 6 months of barely surviving, of trying to be strong enough alone. And then I thought about the library full of books, the desk where I did work that mattered, the household that had quietly accepted me, the man who declared my child his without hesitation or conditions. "Okay," I whispered. "I'll stay." Tom pulled me closer, careful of my swollen belly, and held me while the rain fell and the fire died to embers and the first edge of dawn began to lighten the sky outside. The contractions started at 4 in the afternoon, subtle enough that I almost dismissed them as the Braxton Hicks I'd been experiencing for weeks. I was in Tom's office reviewing a contract for one of Marco's associates, when the first real pain hit, sharp enough to make me gasp and grip the edge of the desk. Tom looked up from his phone immediately. "What's wrong?" "Nothing. Just another contraction, harder this time, stealing my breath." "I think it might be time." He was already moving, phone to his ear. "Mrs. Chun, call Dr. Morrison. Tell her it's starting." Then to Marcus, who appeared in the doorway within seconds, "Get the car ready." But before Marcus could respond, Vincent burst into the office, his usually composed face tight with urgency. "We have a problem." Surveillance picked up 3 vehicles circling the perimeter. 2 more parked on the north access road. "It's Constantine's people." Tom's expression went completely still, the way it did when he was making calculations I couldn't follow. "How many?" "At least 15 that we can confirm. Probably more." Another contraction gripped me, and I pressed my hand to my stomach, feeling the baby shift and press downward. "Tom, I need to get to the hospital." "I know." He moved to me, his hand finding mine. "Vincent, initiate full lockdown. No one in or out until we've cleared every approach. Get Romano and his team on the east gate. Double the guard on the main entrance." "Tom, she needs a hospital. She needs to be alive to get there." Tom's voice was ice. "If we try to move her now, with Constantine's men positioned like this, we won't make it 3 blocks. They're not here for a conversation." Vincent left at a near run. Through the window, I could see men in dark suits taking up positions across the grounds, weapons I'd never seen before suddenly visible. "How long has this been planned?" I managed between contractions. "Long enough." Tom's jaw was tight. "Constantine's been looking for leverage against me for months. He must have found out about you, about the baby. So this is my fault. This is his fault." Tom cut me off. "And he's made a very serious miscalculation." Mrs. Chun appeared with Dr. Morrison, a calm woman in her 50s who'd been doing my prenatal care for the past 3 months. She took the panic room was nothing like I'd imagined. It wasn't some sterile bunker but a fully furnished suite with a bedroom, bathroom, and small sitting area. Tom helped me onto the bed while Dr. Morrison set up her equipment with Mrs. Chen's help. Outside I could hear shouting, the sound of vehicles, something that might have been gunfire in the distance. Tom's phone rang constantly. Vincent with updates. Marcus reporting positions. Someone named Romano saying they'd intercepted 2 men trying to breach the south wall. "You need to go," I told Tom during a brief respite between contractions. "You need to handle this." "I'm exactly where I need to be." "Tom, there's a war happening outside. And there's a birth happening in here." He took my hand, his grip solid and certain. "Vincent can handle Constantine's people. He knows what to do. But this, Louisa, this I'm not missing." Another contraction hit, harder than before, and I cried out despite myself. Dr. Morrison checked me, her expression professionally neutral. "You're progressing quickly. 6 centimeters already." The next 2 hours were a blur of pain and pressure, of Mrs. Chen's steady voice telling me when to breathe, of Dr. Morrison's calm instructions, of Tom's hand in mine, his thumb stroking circles against my palm. Outside the panic room, the security situation escalated. I heard Vincent through Tom's phone speaker, reporting that Constantine's men had breached the outer perimeter, that there was active engagement near the east gate. "Sir, we need you upstairs. Romano's asking for orders. Tell Romano he has full authority to do whatever's necessary." Tom didn't take his eyes off me. "I'm not leaving this room." "But sir." "That's final, Vincent. Handle it." He hung up and focused entirely on me as another contraction peaked. "Breathe, Louisa. Just breathe." "Easy for you to say," I gasped. "You're not being split in half." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "You're the strongest person I know. You can do this." Dr. Morrison positioned herself at the foot of the bed. "Next contraction, I need you to push." Everything narrowed to this. The pain, the pressure, Tom's hand crushing mine, Mrs. Chen's voice counting, Dr. Morrison's steady instructions. Above us I could hear footsteps, shouts, more gunfire. Tom's phone rang again. He ignored it. "Tom, answer it. They can wait." His voice was absolutely certain. "Right now, nothing matters except you and our son." Our son. Even through the pain, the words settled something deep in my chest. I pushed and pushed again and felt something shift and tear and finally give way. The baby's cry filled the panic room. Thin and angry and absolutely perfect. "It's a boy," Dr. Morrison announced, placing the screaming, bloody bundle on my chest. "A healthy boy." I looked down at him through tears. I didn't remember starting to cry. He was red and wrinkled and furious at being born, his tiny fists waving in protest. He was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. Tom leaned over us both, his hand carefully touching the baby's head. His expression transformed into something I'd never seen before. Wonder. Joy. Something that looked almost like fear. "He's perfect," Tom whispered. The baby's cries quieted at the sound of his voice, and impossibly, his eyes opened, unfocused and dark but open. "What's his name?" Mrs. Chun asked softly. I looked at Tom. We'd never discussed it, never planned for this moment. But looking at our son, because he was ours now, biology be damned, I knew exactly what he should be called. "James," I said. "James Cruz." Tom's eyes met mine, and I saw everything unspoken pass between us. Gratitude. Love. The quiet acknowledgement that we'd become a family in the most unlikely way possible. "James Cruz," he repeated, testing the weight of it. Then he kissed my forehead, gentle and reverent. "Welcome to the world, son." Outside the panic room, I could hear Vincent's voice, shouting that Constantine's men were retreating, that they'd held the perimeter, that it was over. But inside this reinforced room, with our newborn son between us and the world kept safely at bay, it felt like something else entirely was just beginning. Tom's phone buzzed with messages he didn't read. The estate would need securing, damage would need assessing, Constantine would need answering for this breach. But for now, Tom stayed exactly where he was, one hand holding mine, the other resting protectively on James's tiny chest. A man powerful enough to command armies, choosing instead to witness the first hours of his son's life. "I love you," I said, the words spilling out before I could stop them. Tom looked at me, really looked at me, and smiled. "I know. I've known since you told Marco Vescovi he was out of line. That was weeks ago." "Exactly." He kissed me, soft and sure. "I love you too, Louisa. You and James. My family." Outside, the war could wait. Inside this room, we had everything that mattered. James was 6 weeks old when everything went wrong. We'd moved to the safe house in Surrey 3 days earlier, a sprawling country estate that Tom insisted was more secure than the Belgravia property, while he dealt with the aftermath of Constantine's failed attack. Mrs. Chun had come with us, along with Marcus and a rotating security detail that Tom swore were his best men. The house was beautiful in that sterile, unlived-in way of properties kept for emergencies. All modern security, bulletproof windows, panic rooms on every floor. Tom had shown me the exits, the safe routes, the places where weapons were hidden. Just precautions, he'd said. Nothing to worry about. I should have known better. It was just after 2 in the morning when James woke for his feeding. I'd gotten good at navigating the darkened nursery, at lifting him from his crib without fully waking, at settling into the chair by the window while he nursed. The grounds were quiet, the security lights casting long shadows across the lawn. Too quiet, I realized. The night shift usually included sounds, footsteps on gravel, the occasional murmur of voices as guards checked in with each other. But tonight there was nothing. Just silence pressing against the bulletproof glass. I stood carefully, James still feeding, and moved away from the window. Reached for my phone on the side table and pulled up the security app Tom had installed. The one that showed camera feeds from around the property. 6 screens, all showing static. My heart began to pound. I pulled James away from my breast, ignoring his protests, and quickly buttoned my shirt. Reached for the burner phone Tom had given me, the one with only 3 numbers programmed in. His, Marcus's, and emergency services. I dialed Marcus first. It rang once, then went to a dead tone. Tom's phone rang 4 times before Vincent answered, his voice tight. Louisa? Where's Tom? He's in London at the meeting. Vincent, something's wrong. The cameras are down and Marcus isn't answering. Get to the panic room. Now. Don't stop for anything. What's happening? Just move. I grabbed the diaper bag I'd learned to keep stocked, threw in extra clothes and formula, and ran for the door. The hallway was dark, emergency lighting casting everything in red. James whimpered against my shoulder, sensing my fear. The panic room was on the ground floor, access through the library. I made it to the stairs before I heard it, the sound of the front door being forced open, the electronic lock sparking and failing. Voices. Multiple men, speaking quickly in English. Ground floor secure. Moving to 2nd level. I recognized that accent. That particular clip to the consonants. Steven. I froze on the landing, James clutched to my chest, and watched through the banister as men in tactical gear moved through the entrance hall below. 6 of them, maybe more. All armed. And leading them, directing them with hand signals like he'd done this before, was Stephen Lewis. He'd changed since the cafe. Harder somehow. His expensive suit replaced with dark clothing that let him blend with his men. But I'd know that profile anywhere, those sharp features, that arrogant posture. She'll be upstairs with the baby, Stephen said. 2nd floor, east wing. That's where the nursery is. One of his men nodded. And cruise. In London for another 3 hours minimum. By the time he gets back, we'll be long gone. They started up the stairs and I moved. The panic room was impossible now, they were between me and the library. But Tom's lessons echoed in my head. When the primary plan fails, improvise. Use what you know. Stay alive. I knew this house. I'd spent 3 days mapping it, learning it, because Tom had taught me that knowledge was survival. The servants' staircase. Narrow, hidden behind a panel in the upstairs hallway, leading directly to the kitchen. I ran silently, James pressed against me, praying he wouldn't cry. Found the panel, pressed the concealed latch, and slipped inside just as I heard Stephen's men reach the 2nd floor landing. Check every room. She's here somewhere. The servants' staircase was pitch black. I navigated by memory and touch, one hand on the wall, the other supporting James, counting steps the way Tom had taught me. 12 steps down, turn left, 8 more steps, door at the bottom. The kitchen was empty. Through the window I could see more men outside, positioned around the perimeter. Not Tom's men. Stephen's. How long had he been planning this? How had he gotten past Tom's security? Then I remembered the messages, the threats, the way Stephen had backed down so completely after Tom's conversation with him. It hadn't been surrender. It had been strategy. He'd been gathering information, making alliances, waiting for the perfect moment. And he'd found it. Tom in London, me isolated in a safe house with minimal security, dependent on systems that could be hacked or bypassed. I heard footsteps above, furniture being overturned. Stephen's voice. "She's not in the nursery. Fan out." James began to whimper. I pressed my hand gently over his mouth, hating myself for it, and looked around the kitchen for options. Tom had shown me the weapons cache. Library behind the false panel of books. Impossible to reach. But he'd also taught me something else. The best weapon is the one your enemy doesn't expect you to have. I grabbed a chef's knife from the block, tested the weight. Not ideal, but better than nothing. Then I opened the cupboard under the sink where Mrs. Chan kept the cleaning supplies and pulled out the industrial bleach and ammonia. "Never mix them," Tom had said once, discussing chemical weapons in that matter-of-fact way of his. Chloramine gas. Deadly in enclosed spaces. I poured both into a plastic container, sealed it loosely, and placed it near the kitchen door. Grabbed a dish towel and soaked it in water, pressed it against James's face as a makeshift filter. Then I waited. Stephen found me 5 minutes later. He came through the kitchen door alone, gun drawn, and stopped when he saw me standing by the counter with James in my arms. "Louisa." He smiled, that same condescending expression from the cafe. "There you are. You've led us on quite a chase. How did you get past security? Your boyfriend's not as untouchable as he thinks. Money opens doors. So does information about his operations." Stephen moved closer, gun still pointed at me. "I've been talking to some very interested parties, people who want Tom Cruise to hurt. And what better way than taking what he values most? You're going to kill us." "Kill you? God, no. That would be wasteful." His smile widened. "I'm going to take you and the baby, use you as leverage, force Tom to make some very expensive concessions. And when he's bankrupted himself trying to get you back, when he's destroyed his own empire." Stephen shrugged. "Then maybe I'll reconsider keeping you alive." James began to cry, a thin wail that made my chest ache. "Give me the baby, Lou, make this easy." I looked at Stephen, at the gun, at the man I'd once thought I loved, and made my decision. I kicked the container of chemicals toward him. It spilled, the mixture immediately beginning to react. Acrid gas rising between us. Stephen stumbled back, confused, and I threw the knife. My aim was terrible. It hit him in the shoulder instead of the chest, but it was enough. He dropped the gun, gasping, and I lunged for it. I'd never fired a weapon in my life. But Tom had taught me the theory, had made me sit through detailed explanations because knowledge you might need is better than ignorance that could kill you. Safety off. Aim center mass. Squeeze, don't pull. I fired twice. Stephen went down, blood blooming across his chest. His expression transforming from arrogance to shock to nothing at all. The chemical gas was spreading. I grabbed James, pressed the wet towel tighter against his face, and ran for the back door. Stephen's men were already responding, shouting, converging on the kitchen. I burst into the night air and sprinted for the tree line. Every lesson Tom had taught me playing on repeat. Keep moving. Don't let them pin you down. Make yourself a hard target. Gunfire behind me. Something hit a tree inches from my head. And then different gunfire from a different direction, and I heard Marcus's voice. "Louisa, down." I dropped to the ground, covering James with my body. Tom's men emerged from the darkness like shadows coming to life, engaging Stephen's squad with the kind of precision that spoke to extensive training. I stayed down, James screaming against my chest, until Marcus reached me. "Are you hurt?" "No. Stephen's in the kitchen. I shot him." Marcus's expression didn't change. "Good. Tom's on his way. Vincent got through to him 10 minutes ago. He helped me up, keeping his body between me and the gunfire. Let's get you secure." By the time Tom arrived 40 minutes later, it was over. Stephen was dead. His men were either dead or captured. The safe house was compromised but defensible. Tom found me in the library, James finally sleeping against my shoulder, Marcus standing guard at the door. He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled us both into his arms, his hands shaking as they moved over me, checking for injuries. "I'm fine," I said. "We're fine. Vincent said you killed Stephen." "I didn't have a choice." "I know." Tom pulled back enough to look at me, and what I saw in his eyes was complicated. Relief, pride, rage, love, all tangled together. "Mrs. Chun said you used household chemicals as a weapon. You taught me that." "I taught you the theory. I never thought." He stopped, shook his head. "You protected our son. You survived. That's all that matters." James stirred, his tiny hand finding Tom's shirt and gripping it. Tom looked down at him, then back at me, and I saw the moment something shifted in his expression. "This ends now," he said quietly. "No more safe houses. No more running. Anyone who comes after my family answers to me directly." "Tom." "I mean it, Louisa. Stephen thought he could use you as leverage because he saw you as weak. He died learning otherwise. Let that be a lesson to anyone else who makes the same mistake." He kissed me then, fierce and claiming, while our son slept between us and his men secured the perimeter outside. "I'd killed a man tonight. I should have felt horrified, traumatized, broken by it. Instead, I just felt alive. And standing there in Tom's arms, I finally understood what he'd been trying to teach me all along. Strength wasn't about never being afraid. It was about protecting what mattered no matter the cost. 6 months after Stephen's death, we returned to the Belgravia estate. Tom had spent the intervening time systematically dismantling every threat against us. Constantine had been dealt with. I didn't ask for details and Tom didn't offer them. The associates who'd helped Stephen breach our security had been identified and removed from Tom's network. The message had been sent, clearly and without room for misinterpretation. Tom Cruise's family was untouchable. James was 7 months old now, beginning to crawl, his dark eyes taking in everything with the same watchful intensity as his father. He'd never know the man whose DNA he carried, would never know the studio apartment in Whitechapel or the cafe where his mother had been humiliated. His world was this, the estate, the protection, the empire Tom had built and I was learning to help maintain. I'd stopped doing freelance translation work 3 months ago. Not because Tom had asked me to, but because Marco had offered me something else entirely, a position managing communications for a network of businesses that span 3 continents. Legitimate businesses mostly, though I'd learned not to look too closely at certain transactions. The work suited me. I was good at seeing patterns, at understanding what people weren't saying, at knowing which information mattered and which was just noise. Tom's associates had stopped seeing me as his pregnant charity case and started seeing me as someone whose opinion carried weight. "Mrs. Cruise has concerns about the Prague acquisition," I'd heard someone say last week, and it had taken me a moment to realize they meant me. We'd gotten married quietly, just the 2 of us and a registrar, with Mrs. Chan and Marcus as witnesses. No announcement, no celebration, just the legal reality that James had a family, and I had a name that meant something in Tom's world. Tonight, the estate was hosting its first major event since the attack. A dinner for 30 of Tom's most important associates. A demonstration that we were not only surviving but thriving. That what had been meant to destroy us had only made us stronger. I stood in front of the mirror in our bedroom now, not the guest room in the East Wing, and adjusted the emerald green dress Tom had commissioned for tonight. It fit perfectly, designed to showcase rather than hide. A statement that I was done apologizing for taking up space. Tom appeared behind me in the mirror, impeccable in his black suit, and placed something around my neck. I looked down to see an emerald pendant, the stone the size of my thumbnail, surrounded by diamonds. "Tom, this is too much." "Nothing is too much." His hands rested on my shoulders. "You're not the woman who sat in that cafe trying to disappear anymore. Tonight, I want everyone to see exactly who you've become." I met his eyes in the mirror. And who have I become? My equal. My partner. The woman who killed to protect our son and didn't break. He turned me to face him. The woman I trust with everything I've built. Downstairs, I could hear the first guests arriving. Mrs. Chun directing staff, Marcus coordinating security, the machinery of the household operating with perfect precision. We made our entrance together, Tom's hand at the small of my back, and I watched as heads turned. I recognized most of these people now: Marco and his wife Sophia, Vincent with his latest girlfriend, the Romanos, the Petrovs, others whose names and businesses I'd catalogued over months of careful observation. Tom, Louisa. Marco embraced us both, his approval evident. "The house looks magnificent. And you," he said to me, "you look like a queen." "She is one," Tom said simply. The dinner was flawless. Conversation flowed. Deals were hinted at and connections strengthened. And through it all I moved with a confidence that would have seemed impossible a year ago. I discussed the Prague acquisition with Marco, translated a contract dispute between two associates who spoke different languages, and deflected questions about the Surrey safehouse with the kind of practiced ease Tom had taught me. James appeared briefly before bed, carried down by Mrs. Chun, and I watched as these dangerous men softened at the sight of him. Tom held him easily, our son gripping his father's finger while associates offered congratulations and admiration. "He looks like you," Sophia told Tom. I caught Tom's eye over James's head and saw the warmth there, the acknowledgement of the lie we'd all agreed to believe. Biology didn't matter. James was a cruise in every way that counted. After the guests left, after Mrs. Chun had supervised the cleanup and the security team had completed their final sweep, Tom found me on the balcony overlooking the garden. The same balcony where I'd first watched his men patrol the grounds and wondered what kind of world I'd entered. He handed me a glass of wine. I could drink again now, one of many small freedoms returned after pregnancy, and stood beside me in comfortable silence. "Do you ever think about that day in the cafe?" I asked. "Every day." Tom's voice was quiet. "I think about the woman sitting in the corner booth, trying to make herself invisible, trying to survive on cold tea and determination. I was so afraid," I admitted. "Of Stephen, of being pregnant and alone, of everything." "I know." I could see it. He turned to face me, leaning against the balcony railing. "But I also saw something else. The way you kept working even though he was mocking you. The way you tried to stand even when he blocked your path. You were terrified, but you weren't broken." "I felt broken." "You were bent." "Not the same thing." Tom reached out, tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. "And now look at you." I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, hiding her pregnancy behind second-hand clothes, living in a studio with a leaking ceiling, accepting cruelty as the price of existing. That woman seemed like a stranger now, someone I'd known briefly and left behind. "I killed a man," I said. "I stood in that kitchen and made a choice, and Stephen died because of it. The old me would have fallen apart. The old you never had a reason to be strong." Tom's hand found mine. "You were surviving for yourself, which is hard enough. But protecting James? That gave you purpose." "You gave me purpose." "No." His voice was firm. "I gave you opportunity, safety, resources. But the strength was always yours, Louisa. I just helped you see it." A breeze swept across the balcony, carrying the scent of the garden below. Roses that Mrs. Chun tended, lavender that lined the walkways, the green growing things that made this fortress feel like home. "When you offered me that first card," I said, "in the cafe, what did you see?" "Really?" Tom considered the question, his thumb tracing circles on my hand. "I saw a woman who deserved better than what she'd been given. And I saw someone who, with the right support, could become exactly who she was meant to be. Which is dangerous." He smiled slightly. "In the best possible way. You navigate my world better than half the men I've worked with for decades. You see things others miss. You understand power structures instinctively." He pulled me closer. "Marco asked me last month if you were available for consultation on a situation in Milan. Vincent wants your opinion on a personnel issue. You've become indispensable. To your business. To me." Tom's voice dropped. "To everything I've built. To everything I am." I looked out over the estate, The empire we'd created together from the ruins of what we'd both been before. Tom had given me shelter, but I'd given him something too. A family, a purpose beyond power and control, a reason to build something that would last beyond ourselves. I never thanked you, I said quietly, for that day, for stepping in when you didn't have to. You've thanked me every day since. Tom turned me to face him fully. By becoming this. By standing beside me instead of behind me. By being strong enough to protect our son when I couldn't get there in time. His hands framed my face. You've given me everything, Louisa. A family. A future. A reason to care about legacy instead of just survival. Inside, I heard James crying through the baby monitor. Not distressed, just awake and demanding attention the way he always did. Tom heard it too, but neither of us moved. A year ago, I was alone and pregnant and terrified, I said. Now I'm standing on a balcony in Belgravia, wearing a dress that costs more than I used to make in 6 months, discussing international business deals like I was born to it. You were born to it. You just didn't know it yet. And you. Tom smiled, genuine and warm. A year ago, I was successful, powerful, respected and feared in equal measure. But I was alone, even surrounded by people. Now I have you. I have James. I have a reason to come home instead of just places to conduct business. He kissed me then, soft and deep, and I tasted wine and promises and the future we were still building together. When we finally pulled apart, James's cries had intensified, his patience with waiting finally exhausted. We should go, I said. Together. Tom took my hand and led me back inside, leaving our wine glasses on the balcony railing like offerings to whatever gods watched over people like us. We walked through the house that had become home, past the library where we'd first talked about the baby, past the office where I'd shown him Stephen's threatening messages, past the conservatory where Tom had declared James his son before he was even born. In the nursery, James stood in his crib, gripping the railing, his face red with indignation at being left alone. The moment he saw us, his expression transformed into pure joy. Tom lifted him easily, and James immediately grabbed for his father's tie, babbling something that wasn't quite words but clearly had meaning. He's going to be trouble, I said, watching them together. He's a cruise. Of course he'll be trouble. Tom kissed James's head, then looked at me. But he'll have you to teach him how to navigate it. How to be strong without being cruel. How to protect what matters. I moved closer, completing the picture. The three of us together in the warm light of the nursery, the estate secure around us, the future stretching out like an open road. No regrets. Tom asked quietly. I thought about the cafe, about Stephen's cruelty, about the studio apartment and the cold tea and the fear that had defined me for so long. I thought about the moment Tom had stepped between me and humiliation, had offered me a card that led to all of this. Not a single one, I said. James yawned, his small body relaxing against Tom's chest, and we stood there together, not victim and protector anymore, but equals building an empire that would last long after we were gone. The woman who'd been mocked in a cafe was gone forever. In her place stood Louisa Cruz. Mother, partner, equal. Dangerous in all the right ways. Finally, completely whole. And standing there with my family in the home we'd built from nothing, I knew exactly who I was and where I belonged. Here. With them. Forever. The dawn light filtered through the nursery windows as James finally drifted off to sleep in Tom's arms. We stood together in the quiet, watching our son's chest rise and fall with the steady rhythm of dreams, and I thought about how far we'd come from that cafe in Kensington. A year ago, I'd been invisible, broken, convinced that survival was the best I could hope for. Now I was Mrs. Louisa Cruz, mother, partner, queen of an empire I'd helped build. Stephen had mocked me for gaining weight, never knowing I carried a child who would become heir to everything Tom had created. The father who'd abandoned us never knew what he'd lost. And I'd discovered a strength I never knew existed, forged in the fire of protecting what mattered most. Tom looked at me over James's sleeping form, And in his eyes I saw everything we'd become together. Not a fairy tale. Not a rescue story. But something better. A partnership built on mutual respect, shared strength, and the absolute certainty that we would burn down the world before we let anyone hurt our family again. "Come to bed," he whispered. I followed him out of the nursery, leaving the door cracked so we could hear if James woke. We walked through our home, our empire, and I felt the weight of everything we'd survived settle into something that felt like peace. The woman who'd trembled over cold tea in a cafe was gone. In her place stood someone who knew her worth. Someone who'd learned that true strength wasn't about never falling. It was about who you became when you rose. Someone who'd found her crown in the most unlikely place imaginable. And I wore it without apology. Call to action. If Louise's journey from humiliation to empire resonated with you, smash that like button and let me know in the comments. What would you have done in that cafe when Steven started his cruel mockery? Would you have stayed silent or fought back? Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss another story about women who refused to stay broken, who turned their pain into power, and who built empires from the ashes of their old lives. Drop a comment telling me, what story should I tell next? Do you want to hear about the business rival who tried to destroy Louise's new position in Tom's organization? Or maybe the moment James took his first steps and Tom's enemies realized the crew's legacy was truly unstoppable? Share this video with anyone who needs a reminder that strength isn't about never being vulnerable. It's about what you do when someone tries to use that vulnerability against you. And remember, you're not defined by who underestimated you. You're defined by who you became despite them. I'll see you in the next story. Stay strong, stay dangerous, and never, ever let anyone make you feel small.